Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Wally. Could I ask you to state to the inquiry your name and occupation?
My name is Aaron Jacob Wally, and I am a traffic engineer I'm a director of Ratio Consultants and have been practicing for approximately 20 years.
Thank you. And what's your business address?
8 Wynn Street in Cromwell.
Thank you. And could I ask you to just briefly explain your role in the preparation of the Traffic and Transport Impact Assessment for Willatook Wind Farm in Appendix G of the EES?
Yeah, I have assisted Willatook Wind Farm with the preparation, and I had an oversight role in the preparation of that Traffic Impact Assessment report.
Thank you. And you've prepared a witness statement for the purpose of these proceedings dated the 29th of September.
I have.
Are there any changes of opinions or corrections that you wish to make to that statement?
There are not.
Okay, do you adopt that statement as the basis of your evidence today?
I do.
And you've also prepared a PowerPoint presentation, which I think our office sent to Planning Panels Victoria on Friday. Are there any new matters or any evidence or other matters in your PowerPoint presentation that aren't already addressed in your statement and TTIA?
No, there aren't.
All right, thank you. I invite you to take the inquiry through your presentation, please.
All right. Now, I take it that the best way to do this is for me to share the presentation?
Yes, that's what's typically been happening. Do you need assistance with that?
Give me a second. I may need some technical assistance, but I'll see if I can.
Well,
Apologies.
if you like.
Yep.
Let me get my house in order.
Unfortunately, I'm not that familiar with the Zoom controls. Oh, sorry.
There's a share screen down on the right-hand bottom.
I have that. Yep.
That's down the bottom of this page.
Apologies. I'll do that.
But I can share it if you'd like me to.
Look, that might be easier, and then I can run through and ask it to move from one slide to the next. All right.
Okay, so can you see the PowerPoint presentation there?
I can, and thank you very much for that. All right.
Now, of course, I'm trying to. Yeah, well, there we go.
All right. Look, I'll just provide a brief introduction. As mentioned, I'm a traffic engineer. I've got about 20 years experience. I've presented traffic expert at VCAT and planning matters before, and I have a good range of experience across renewable energy and resource sector projects in Western Victoria. Specifically relevant to this proceeding, I assisted with the preparation of the EES for the Dundonnell Wind Energy Facility near Mortlake, which is to the east of the site and north of Mortlake. My instructions on this matter were to summarise the traffic assessment report in support of the EES, which I've adopted as the basis of my evidence, identify anything I agree or disagree, further works that I've undertaken, and also respond to submissions. So I'm starting today with just a brief summary of the transport context of the project's assumption analysis, understanding the panel that my evidence has been read. So I'll skip through that relatively quickly. I'll then provide a summary of my view of the mitigation measures that have been identified and applied to the project in response to the transport impacts. And I'll then move to submissions and additional investigations that I've made in response to these submissions, and then move to any recommendations that I have, and a review of draft conditions. So the project summary, the site sits to the south of the Woolslop-Haywood Road from a transport context, which Woolslop-Haywood Road is a declared road that runs east-west to the north of the site. Other roads in the project area are local and council managed roads. The table 7.1 of the impact assessment report submitted with the EES provides a summary of the classification of the roads within the project area. under DOD jurisdiction and Moyne Shire Council jurisdiction. The ES Traffic Impact Assessment Report, if we move on to the next slide, also provides a brief summary of the public transport context of the site, and you can see the site in relation to, in the figure 712, in relation to regional bus routes, and also in figure 713 in regional coach routes. And moving to the next slide, also in the context of regional school bus routes. And these have been reviewed and considered in detail in the context of route selection and the project traffic impacts on road users in that context. Moving on to slide 5. The key elements of the project in terms of traffic generation elements basically has considered materials during, the key components of the project in terms of, so the traffic generation characteristics are through construction, project operation, and the decommissioning phases of the project. Relevant to construction, what has been investigated in terms of the road network are locations for potential material sourcing during the construction phase of the project, and principally 4 quarry sites have been identified that might supply material required for road construction and or aggregate construction for concrete for wind turbine generator footings. Routes for those projects during the preparation of the TIA were visually inspected and largely have been concentrated to arterial roads, accepting that arterial roads are the preferred a preferred access route supporting heavy vehicle traffic in the precinct across the region. The summary is in table 7.2 of those investigations. Secondary component, if we move on to the next slide, is largely also a key element during the wind farm construction is the delivery of wind turbine components and other substation components, plant and materials. Now, the project has identified that the Port of Portland is the preferred access point for those components. During the preparation of the traffic impact assessment, 3 potential routes were identified in consultation with Department of Transport, generally relying on the arterial road network. Those 3 routes were visually inspected and also subject to a desktop analysis. The preferred route from the Port of Portland that was identified and subject to detailed investigation is the solid blue line from Port of Portland to the project site that runs through Tarinda and Bleasdale and generally relies on Woolsthorpe, Haywood Road and Princess Highway and Henty Highway. We'll move on to the next slide. Those routes for oversize and the wind turbine component haulage were assessed using a based on the critical wind turbine component, which is a 93-metre turbine blade, and swept paths were prepared for key intersections on the preferred route to identify the travel path of that vehicle, or the likely travel path of that vehicle through intersections and works and temporary works that might need to be undertaken to support the movement of those turbine components. The full suite of these are just example swept paths that are attached to Appendix B of the ESTIA. Moving on to the next slide. Well, I think have we missed a couple of apologies. There seems to be a couple of slides that have been missed in my current presentation, but what I might do is just move on to the next slide. Thank you. And I'll talk through the wind farm traffic generation work that was undertaken. So to assess the traffic impacts and then identify mitigation measures, modelling of the traffic generated by the project across all project stages was assessed during construction, during operation and decommissioning. The construction assumption, the construction traffic was assessed based on assumptions provided by Willatook Wind Farm, being that it would be a 24-month construction period, that there would be staff travelling to and from the site from Port Fairy and other accommodation locations remote to the site. As mentioned, that turbine components would be transferred to site from Port of Portland, along with plant and other components, and heavy vehicles would associated with materials haulage would likely be from the quarry sites identified in the previous slide, or subject to the establishment of on-site quarry within the project area generally itself. The other assumptions that have been considered is that the on-site concrete batching plants, and that with the on-site quarry, generally 80% of aggregate required for the project construction, largely associated with roads and hard stand, will be sourced on site, or without the establishment of a quarry on site, 100% that would be sourced off site. And the preferred location of that is the closest quarry, which is the Tyrone North Quarry to the south of the project. From the modelling that was done during construction, it's been assessed that at the peak construction period, there'd be up to 406 vehicle movements generated by the project per day, and that's weeks 49 to 90 during the middle of the construction process, when the bulk of activity on site is starting to finalise the internal road construction, but also wind turbine erection on the site. And a significant component of that traffic is actually expected to be associated with staff movements to and from the site. If you move on to the next slide.
Mr. Wally, I'm just checking the version, the PowerPoint presentation. Actually, this is the version that's been tabled, so we'll just keep going through this.
And that's fine. I can talk through the elements that I need to from that. So the next slide is, move to the back to the previous slide. Thank you, Tim. The previous slide is traffic on the basis that there is no on-site sourcing of aggregate on an on-site quarry. So what has been assessed is two project traffic scenarios, one with on-site sourcing of materials with the quarry established, and one without the quarry established, such that aggregate is all externally sourced from the site. We'll move on to the next slide. Thank you, Tim. What also is a critical component of the project traffic is the distribution of the traffic to and from the project area. So the modelling done for the project is on the basis of 30% of staff movements being to and from the west of the project area and 70% to and from the east, and that's from advice from Willatook Wind Farm on the likely location of where staff would be housed in relation to the project area. For heavy vehicles, and this largely relates to scenarios where material is being sourced externally for road hard stand and concrete production, is that those heavy vehicles would predominantly be to and from the east via Woolsthorpe Haywood Road, and oversize over mass vehicles, which are those transporting wind turbine components, would be from the west via Woolsthorpe Haywood Road from Port of Portland. On that basis, the project modelling is the peak daily traffic volumes as a result of considering the distribution is that Woolsthorpe Haywood Road to the west of the project area is likely to carry up to 107 vehicle movements per day, in addition to existing traffic, during that peak construction window of weeks 49 to 90. And the bulk of that traffic is staff movements, so light vehicle traffic, with 4% of that traffic being heavy vehicles and or oversized overmass vehicles moving turbine components. Between and to the west of the project, sorry, to the east of the project area in Woolsthorpe Haywood Road, the estimate is that the project would generate in the order of 299 to 359 vehicle movements per day, subject to the on-site sourcing of aggregate for road hard stand. And more significantly is that the percentage of heavy vehicles in that volume is higher at between 19 and 33%. So it's the combination of the project traffic and the distribution of the traffic that has led to the identification of the physical mitigation measures that I'll just talk through shortly in terms of external road improvements in the project area on Woolsthorpe Haywood Road. So if we move on to the next slide. So the approach to determining the appropriate traffic mitigation measures follows a standard best practice approach for major infrastructure projects. And it really seeks to either avoid by limiting the project traffic to arterial roads wherever possible, and identifying preferred access routes using those arterial roads, and mitigation options which really are talking about improvements to infrastructure, whether they're permanent or temporary, to support project-related traffic. The use of traffic management plans, which I'll go through in a bit more detail shortly, but as an accepted tool to identify project traffic impacts and put in practices and procedures to try to mitigate those across a range of issues and scenarios. Also looking at road maintenance and road management agreements to deal with issues of maintenance and issues caused by project traffic on the road network, and also reinstatement post, particularly the construction period of the project. Stakeholder consultation and engagement processes, again, and that's to bring in third parties, road users, council, Department of Transport, to make sure that there's communication through the project stages of potential road closures, etc. And then a rehabilitation measure, which is fundamentally to leave the roads in as good or better condition than when the project started, and make sure that the infrastructure, is consistent with existing conditions at the end of the project life. Move to the next slide. So in terms of the key tools for mitigation measures that have been applied, as I said, there's traffic management plans. A traffic management plan is pretty much best practice approach in terms of dealing with short-term traffic impacts. It's applicable to all project stages. The intent of traffic management plans in the context of the Willatook project and the way that they are applied will be that the traffic management plan should confirm project traffic generation activity prior to commencement of works. That's necessary in the context of the project, and is consistent with approaches for other wind farm projects, understanding that there will be refinement of the project specifications and construction timeframes, etc., up to the commencement of the project. The TMPs will have consideration of all existing road users and require appropriate stakeholder input during the preparation of those. So that involves consultation with the community, emergency service providers, bus school operators, public transport operators, and coordination with Department of Transport and Moyne Shire Council. The traffic management plan should seek to, and will seek to, identify project traffic generation characteristics at the prior to commencement. Again, the TIA has done an assessment of an on-site quarry or off-site quarry, or sorry, the traffic modelling that's been done for the project is on the basis of two scenarios, one with an on-site quarry and one with an off-site quarry. So again, there is a need to review the project traffic generation characteristics prior to finalising TMPs. It would include a stakeholder engagement review and feedback process during implementation. Mechanisms for the ongoing review and monitoring of the implementation of the TMP arrangements, and that with the ability for feedback. Moyne Council in submission has identified the need for a road safety auditor as to monitor and implement and as part of that reporting and feedback process. And that is, again, an appropriate tool in my view and best practice in terms of how these TMPs are run and implemented. Other tools are green travel plans, which can be used as a mechanism to fundamentally, in the context of the project, look at options to minimise staff traffic movements to and from the site, either using shuttle buses or other initiatives that can be implemented. The other toolkit in the toolkit is road management agreements, and they will look at matters of permanent road improvements works prior to commencement, maintenance during construction and rehabilitation issues, and the temporary works that will be required to support the wind turbine component haulage, which again I'll talk through. So the suite of tools, in my view, do reflect current best practice for wind farm projects and other major infrastructure projects regionally, and have been used on the Dundonnell wind farm project successfully in recent times. So I'm comfortable with the approach that's been taken in terms of the mitigation measures to be applied to the project. I'll move to the next slide. So this is just a very much a summary of the mitigation measures that are included in the ESTI, the Traffic Impact Assessment Report. And I won't go through this in detail, but really speak to the avoidance, the minimisation, the rehabilitation aspects of the mitigation approach, and the specific mitigation items that have been identified under each of those categories. The application of these in terms of the project and traffic impacts is also shown in table 9.4 of the Environmental Effects Statement Traffic Impact Assessment Report. Moving on to the next slide, Tim. In terms of physical measures that have been identified, I just wanted to highlight the key things that the impact assessment has identified in terms of roads in the project area, in terms of physical improvements, is that Woolsthorpe Haywood Road through the project area switches between a two-lane sealed carriageway and a single lane sealed width of about 4 metres and gravel shoulders. The increase in traffic on Woolsthorpe Haywood Road as a result of the project to the west of the project area and the west of Tyrone North Road will require the widening of the remaining single lane section of Woolsthorpe Haywood Road, which is identified as about a 2.4 kilometre section around Poynton's Lane. That's to the east. I apologise. I'm getting my easts and wests confused this morning. To the west of the project, traffic volumes, as I highlighted earlier, the additional project traffic is largely staff vehicle movements and oversized overmass vehicle movements associated with turbine haulage components. And the ESTI identifies that widening of this section of Woolsthorpe Haywood Road is not necessarily required, but that maintenance of the road shoulders is an appropriate response for the project during that construction period. And I agree with both of those outcomes. On the next slide, Tim.
Mr. Wally, can I interrupt you for a moment? So this is just an extract of table 9.3 of the transport impact assessment, is it?
It is, yes.
I'm just mindful the inquirer would have already read your report. So
Yep.
unless there's any particular point you wish to highlight, should we move on?
We can move on.
And your next slides, responder submissions. May I invite you to just focus on, unless the inquiry is interested otherwise, of course, but to focus on the submission of Glenelg Council.
That's fine, I can do that. That's not a problem. So if we want to, so look, that's the submission. So in the Glenelg Shire Council submission highlights further information associated with movement of turbine components and other major components out of Port of Portland. And that's in response to some potential concerns about the size of turbine components and particularly clearance under bridge structures on Henty Highway. In most particular, the bridge of the Bridgewater Road overpass, which is shown on the northern, the top of that figure, with that, and it's got a limited clearance of 5.2 meters under that bridge structure. The assessment of the suitability of this route and the assumptions around turbine component sizes are based on a 93 meter turbine blade, which has a travel height of approximately 5.1 meters, and turbine tower sections which have approximately 30 meters in length, but with a lower. Sorry.
Can you? I just lost you for a moment then.
You did. Sorry, I was just distracted by the. So the Glenelg submission has asked for further clarification to confirm the suitability of the identified route. I'm comfortable that the identified route is appropriate for turbine components as discussed in the ESTA, being, as I said, the 93 meter turbine blades, and swept paths are included in Appendix B that show that route. Also on the basis that the tower sections can be segmented and will actually stackable on the back of a transport vehicle and fit under bridge structures. But understanding there might be some change in specification or looking at alternative options, the Glenelg Shire submission identified an alternate route using Madeira Packet Road and other local roads looping to the south and to the west of the Henty Highway access to Port of Portland, as shown in the dashed blue line on the attached figure. I have sought to inspect that route and confirm its suitability for haulage of turbine components for the Willatook project. So I've also sought to investigate the use of that route by other projects. So on the following slides, Tim, what those investigations I've identified is that it has been used, so that route has been used to support nearby wind farm projects in the past. Key intersections, it's evident from investigation of that route that there is existing areas of hard stand that have been delivered around key intersections, and my investigation is detailed in my statement. Basically say that I'm of the view that I'm comfortable that the route can be used for components of approximately up to 30 meters in length, and if the components that require additional clearance that wouldn't otherwise fit under bridge structures to at least 6 to 7 meters, based on there are no overhead structures, vegetation on those routes is generally clear of carriageways, so that it provides an alternate access route for components should the preferred route not be suitable for some components, subject to confirmation of wind turbine specifications closer to project commencement.
All right, thanks very much. I just wanted to ask you about a couple of other things very quickly. The Department of Transport made a submission recommending a traffic management plan condition. Have you had a chance to have a look at that?
I have reviewed that submission, yes.
And do you have any views or opinions on that condition you'd like to share with the inquiry?
The Department of Transport submission, the conditions that are proposed in that submission appear to reflect equivalent conditions that were applied to the Dundonnell Wind Farm project. Against the draft conditions proposed by Willatook Wind Farm, my view is that the draft conditions proposed by Willatook Wind Farm effectively provide a similar level of outcome in terms of the traffic management plan as the DOT conditions. So I don't have, I'm of the view that the conditions that are proposed, the draft conditions proposed by Willatook Wind Farm provide us an equivalent level of confidence and sorry, yep, I'll leave it there, Tim.
Okay, no, it's fine. And secondly, I think I dudded you, Mr. Wally, because the version of the slides that we filed actually did include a summary of the construction, operation and decommissioning traffic generation. Do you want to take the inquiry to those matters now, or is that just evident from the TIA anyhow?
Look, I think it's evident from the TIA, and I tried to summarise that as I was speaking to the table earlier.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. I'll just get an indication of how much time parties proposing to ask questions would seek. I'll start with the Glenelg Shire. I see Mr. Berry is here with us this morning. So do you seek to ask questions of Mr. Wally this morning?
Morning, Mr. Chair. No, we have no questions for Mr. Wally today. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Moyne Shire Council, so Ms. Marshall.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I imagine that it will be between 15 minutes and half an hour.
Okay, 30 minutes. Thank you. Any other parties seeking to ask questions of Mr. Wally? All right. The questions from the IAP this morning will be from Member O'Neill, and we don't have, I don't believe we'll go much further than about 15 minutes, just so anyone wants to plan around the timing. All right, so when you're ready, Ms. Marshall, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Can I just do an audio check with, I'm here at the Maddox office with Ms. Granger, and we're using different technology than usual. Can the panel hear and see me clearly?
Yes, I can see and hear you. I assume others can as well.
All right, thank you. It was really just because we didn't do a test beforehand, so I just wanted to make sure. Good morning, Mr. Whaley. Can you hear and see me?
I can, yes.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to start first by asking you some questions in relation to your previous wind energy facility experience. You've referred to these at paragraph 3 of your witness statement, where you say that you've been involved in some solar farms, but in particular that you've been involved in the Dundonnell wind energy facility project and the Murra wind farm project?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and as I understand it, Murra is a facility that's had stage 1 completed and stage 2 is under construction. Is that your understanding?
I'm not involved in the delivery of the project, but that is my understanding, yes.
Okay, and in relation to Dundonnell, that's a project that's completed and operational, is that the case?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, and in relation to, you've indicated with Murra that you haven't been involved in the delivery of that project. To what extent have you been involved in the construction or operational transport assessment processes for Dundonnell?
My involvement in Dundonnell was through the approval process,
Mm-hmm.
and that included the preparation of the impact assessment report for that project. I was not involved in the panel process for that project, and I've not been involved in the delivery of that project and all the construction traffic management plan that was, I understand, was prepared to assist the delivery of the project.
Okay, and is that delivery of that project and the various transport elements of it, is that being undertaken by your firm, or does a different firm of traffic engineers take it over at the point at which the approvals have been granted?
In the case of Dundonnell, I am aware that the traffic management plan condition for Dundonnell required an independent road safety auditor, and that was someone appointed in between the proponent and Moyne Council and Department of Transport, that was independent of myself or the organisation I was working for at the time, to prepare and deliver the traffic management plan.
Okay. Now, we were talking this morning about traffic engineering and the way that traffic engineers use data in relation to uses, for instance, like a cinema or a childcare centre or the like, and the extent to which there's information that traffic engineering firms obtain, not just about what's projected in relation to a particular use, but then how the actual facility performs relative to those projections once operational. In Victoria, there's now been more than 30 wind farms that have been approved and constructed. To what extent is there trend analysis that traffic engineers such as you are able to bring to bear in relation to the projections that you're undertaking, the assumptions that you're making, and how those projections flow through to what actually occurs on the ground?
That's quite a broad question to answer, and it probably, I could talk to elements of that, but is there could I clarify if there's a specific aspect of that you want me to speak to?
Well, what I'm really looking for, Mr. Welly, is to say you've made certain assumptions and projections in relation to this wind farm. You've been involved in other wind farms previously. At what point do we say, well, we can now see what happens at wind farms compared to what actually occurs, or what's projected to occur and what happens, say, in the construction phase in terms of heavy vehicles, light vehicles, those sorts of things?
I don't actually have, and I'm not familiar with any post-audit review that has been done for a wind farm project in Western Victoria, but comparing the assessment that was done at the traffic impact assessment stage to the assessment that would have been subsequently done in the case of Dundonnell at the traffic management plan preparation stage. As I said, the traffic management plan will include further analysis of expected project traffic volumes, particularly during the construction phase, or for whatever phase that traffic management plan applies to at that time, to a post-implementation audit. So the assumptions that underpin the impact assessment that's been prepared for Willatook are based on known quantities around, for instance, how the tonnage capacity of a truck and dog to move aggregate around from the quarry site to the project site. So there are known quantities that I've used and the impact assessment report is used to assess and calculate volumes. But to answer your question in terms of a comparative and an audit, I'm not familiar with something that has been done in Western Victoria as yet, and I've not sought to do that.
Okay. Can I just ask you two further questions in relation to that? Firstly, in answering that question, you've referred to not being aware of any comparison that's been made in Western Victoria. Are there other locations in Victoria where you're aware of that trend analysis or post-construction audit process that's been undertaken in respect of wind farms?
No, I'm not.
Okay, and to the extent that you've indicated that you're not aware that that work has been undertaken, would it be useful to inform your investigations in relation to future wind farms if that work was undertaken either on a regional perspective or on a wind farm by wind farm perspective?
I'm less concerned about that in the context of identifying the volume of traffic. I think a post-audit process is always valuable to identify, better ways of doing things, and that's not just on wind farm projects, that's across the board in terms of what did we assess would happen and what actually did happen. But my experience with wind farm projects, that really comes down to and in the context of projects, particularly in Moyne, I think Macarthur Wind Farm has been one that was a fairly controversial one as an early wind farm project that was delivered in Moyne, where there weren't enough checks and balances put in place in terms of the approvals and traffic management process, and to allow for the rehabilitation and rectification works that had ultimately needed to happen. And that was one where that was an example that's been flagged and highlighted with me in terms of not about the specifics around traffic volume, not necessarily around the specifics around access roads, but fundamentally the specifics around the maintenance and rehabilitation checks and balances that can be put in place to ensure that the impacts during project construction, which is really the critical period for a wind farm, are managed in the most appropriate and sensitive way possible, understanding that there's always going to be some moving with, the assumptions that are made at the approval process and what happens on site. There will always be some variation, and there's reasons for that. Well beyond the control of the project, floods in Western Victoria at the moment are a key thing that are happening that would change the way materials could be moved around the site, and things might need to change. The lessons learned in Moyne in particular from Macarthur and other projects have really reinforced the need to have a robust traffic management plan for project delivery in particular, and the technique of using an independent road safety auditor to monitor and review, and then be able to have a reporting mechanism and a refinement mechanism back through council and Department of Transport and other stakeholders as necessary, in my view, is really the benchmark standard about how to best manage and control and respond to the project traffic impacts.
Do you think that post-project review and learning from a project is more important in circumstances like in the Moyne Shire, where we have an emerging cluster that is set to significantly grow over the forward period?
I would agree with that, but it really is to inform how best to manage it during implementation and what mechanisms are best implemented to manage it during construction periods when there is, when the project is being delivered.
Okay. I wanted to then ask you some questions about Woolsthorpe Heath Haywood Road. And if I can do that by sharing my screen with you. So hopefully, Mr. Whaley, you can see the article that I've put up on the screen, which is an image of a newspaper article from the local newspaper, The Standard, which is dated the 15th of October 2020. So this is an article which refers to the Woolsthorpe Haywood Road as being dangerously dilapidated, and talks about it being fourth on the Vic Roads priority list for repair, and as an important choice for traffic driving between Portland and Melbourne or Ballarat, including B-double truck, timber trucks, milk tankers and fertiliser trucks. It also carries the local school bus and the bulk of tourist traffic. It indicates that despite its status as a declared C road, as a principal route for the movement of people and goods, only a single lane width is sealed, and the unsealed shoulders are utterly inadequate to the tonnage that batters them, and indicates that the Department of Transport is actively working on a more permanent and comprehensive solution to the condition of the Woolsthorpe Haywood Road. In relation to that, can I firstly ask, to the extent that that describes the importance of the Woolsthorpe Haywood Road in the local economy and the way of moving people around, people and goods around, does this article accurately describe the status of Woolsthorpe Haywood Road as a principal route for the movement of people and goods in the local area?
It is an arterial road. It is a C-class arterial road, so that is the third in the tier of below freeway standard. It is carrying, my recollection, and I don't have the figure in front of me, is carrying around 300 vehicle movements per day. And I don't know specifically which section of the road this article is making reference to. It is, the road does extend between Haywood and Warrnambool Penshurst Road, so it's quite a lengthy piece of road. The section through the project area does have sections where the road has been widened and is a two-way seal, and also does have sections where it is a single lane seal with gravel shoulders. And the TIA, in conversations with Moyne DOT, acknowledged, it's acknowledged in the impact assessment report that the condition of the road, particularly over winter, can be poor, and that's hence the recommendations that have been put forward, and the works that have been identified that would be undertaken to upgrade a section of the road that will be relied on by project traffic to the east of the project, and also to maintain the shoulders through the construction period by the project for the section west of the project area to the Hamilton Port Fairy Road, which will be the key section that project traffic will use.
Mm-hmm. To the extent that the road is described in the article as being dangerously dilapidated, is that a description that you would agree is apt in relation to some parts of the road?
Well, look, from my last inspection, there are certainly some maintenance issues that the Department of Transport should be rectifying on the road. I can't speak to, I haven't driven the road in the last month or so, so I'm not familiar with exactly what the condition is today, but it is a road that I understand has been identified over time as one that it doesn't get as much maintenance and investment as Moyne Shire Council and road users would appreciate.
Okay. Having not driven the road in a month, but having regard to the weather conditions and publicity about the state of roads around the state more generally, would you anticipate that that the condition of the road has deteriorated further with the weather conditions?
Look, I can't really say. I can't comment on that without seeing it myself in the last month.
Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen at that point. Would you agree that the Woolsthorpe Haywood Road is also likely to be the main road used for construction access to Woolsthorpe and Hawkesdale wind farms as well?
I'm familiar with the location of Woolsthorpe wind farm, which is to the east of, I believe it's Warrnambool Penshurst Road, which runs north-south with another arterial road. And I understand that, yes, the Woolsthorpe wind farm does get access from Woolsthorpe Haywood Road, but from that section to the east of Warrnambool Penshurst Road. So not a section of the road that directly that the Willatook project relies on. I'm not familiar enough with the location of the Hawkesdale wind farm to make comment on the use of Woolsthorpe Haywood Road by that project. Okay.
To what extent does the work that you've undertaken take into account the likelihood or the possibility of those other projects being under construction at the same time as Willatook and the impacts that that might have on a road like the Woolsthorpe Haywood Road?
There is that section, and I'll refer to it. So section 10 of the TIA report does talk to cumulative impacts in terms of understanding the timelines and the overlap of timelines between projects that were known at the time of the preparation of the impact assessment report. And relative to the construction period, figure 10.2 of the traffic impact assessment highlights the projects that would likely overlap with the delivery of the Willatook project, being the Woolsthorpe wind farm, which is the one described that I described, which I understand is to the west, but doesn't rely on it's the same section of Woolsthorpe Haywood Road as the Willatook project, and the Mount Fines wind farm project, which I understand is more remote from the site, such that there is unlikely that that project would rely on the same or Woolsthorpe Haywood Road through the project area.
To what extent then, at what point with all of these projects underway are there any issues about increases in traffic along a road like Woolsthorpe Haywood Road actually brought to bear in the traffic analysis? Is it that you deal with it in the traffic management plan at the stage of commencement of construction, because at that stage you've got more information available about what other projects are being undertaken? Is there a sense at which the TIA is undertaking a bit of a theoretical analysis of cumulative impacts in relation to traffic?
Look, I think that is an apt observation that you've made, and I agree that the traffic impact assessment is providing an overview at this point in time, and that the specifics and refinement of the traffic impacts are captured in the traffic management plan. And that's applicable to traffic management plans that would be prepared for the other wind farm projects that potentially overlap during the construction period. And the traffic management plan conditions and the draft conditions proposed and the incorporation of a road safety auditor and that internal review process in the traffic management plan really provides that opportunity for coordination between projects and capturing of particular circumstances that might even change through delivery. And again, I think, our current flood situation is a great example of something that couldn't be predicted at the time of the traffic impact assessment being prepared, but could be reviewed and captured through the traffic management plan process and the review mechanisms in the traffic management plan that will be embedded in the traffic management plan, such that there can be coordination, and it would fall to the responsible Moyne Shire Council in this circumstance to do that. But that is the most appropriate mechanism, in my view, to deal with these sorts of cumulative issues.
Okay. At paragraph 17 of your report, you've referred to sections of public roads that will be utilised as links between various parts of the wind farm site, and you've listed 3 sections of roads that are relevant. Old Dunmore Road is one of the roads that will be used for the quarry access road. Should that be included as a reference to a local road that's a public road that's to be used?
It is a road that will be used to move plant to establish the quarry, but it is not a road that is actually used to move material from the quarry around the project area site during construction, or used by the project during operation to move for general movement around the project area. So I don't feel the need. It's not. I'll make the distinction that it is a road that would be used, as I said, on a very short-term basis to move plant to establish the on-site quarry should that on-site quarry proceed, but it won't be a road that's used ongoing for project construction or project operation activity.
Okay. Can I take you to section the section relating to operations of the wind farm at page 16 of your evidence at paragraph 39, where you've talked about traffic movements associated with operations. The council's experience in relation to these kind of projects is that even once operational, there is demand to bring in cranes on oversized vehicles for any substantial maintenance, which seems to be occurring at other wind farms at least 2 to 3 times per year. How are those traffic movements considered and approved if the traffic management plan really focuses and deals with the construction period?
Any oversized vehicles on the road network are actually managed through a separate permit system by the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator. So the specific use of a road at that occasion would require a permit to be issued through that process to identify the size of that vehicle and the appropriateness of the route of that vehicle. So there is a mechanism immediately outside a traffic management plan that's already in place, and an established mechanism to deal with those one-off situations.
Given that we're in a circumstance where we've now got experience about what the number of traffic movements associated with that kind of maintenance are, would it be appropriate to deal at least in some way with that kind of vehicle movement through the planning permit to ensure that there's an awareness of the routine and the way that work is to be undertaken now?
Look, there could be a traffic management plan implemented for those works, and I don't have a particular concern if where there is major maintenance required during the operational phase of a project, that a traffic management plan be prepared to deal with the specifics around that work at that time. And I think that would be in terms of the use of roads and the transport of a major turbine component in and of itself, I think that generally is the National Heavy Vehicle Regulation process and the permit process is really the appropriate tool. A traffic management plan that would be through council to be prepared at that time could provide an additional layer of confidence and understanding of what would need to be done. My understanding is it'd be a fairly short-term outcome, and it should be prepared specifically at that time of that event.
Okay. All right. Can I you had some in your presentation, you had some swept path analysis work that you'd undertaken in relation to the intersections, which I think are in the Glenelg municipality.
The examples in the presentation were from Glenelg, that's correct.
Yeah. The council has queried the swept path analysis on the basis that the industry standard rear overhangs haven't been utilised for either the vehicle or the blade. Is that the case?
Not to my understanding. I haven't prepared the swept paths directly myself. I've had assistance in they're being prepared by a member of the design team at Ratio using a standard template. Again, they are examples, and the traffic management plan would include a review of those vehicle movements at that time to confirm the specific works that would need to be done at intersections. I'm comfortable that those swept paths are an appropriate and a reasonable representation of a blade transfer vehicle based on a 93-metre blade for the purposes of understanding and identifying the likely works that will be needed on a temporary basis to move these components from Port of Portland to the project site.
I wanted to take you then to some further questions in relation to Woolsthorpe Haywood Road by reference to the sections of your report from page 17. In that section, you've talked about the various sections of the Woolsthorpe Haywood Road and the vehicles that are to be adopted. You've, at paragraph 51, adopted the TIA findings that identify the section of Woolsthorpe Haywood Road that's to be widened to 7 metres to provide two sealed traffic lanes in each direction. Which section of Woolsthorpe Haywood Road are you referring to there? Is it the section that you're referring to in paragraph 50?
Yeah, that's correct. And that's the section that's identified in figure 3.3 of my evidence under paragraph 57 on page 19.
Okay, and so that's the 2.4 metre kilometre single lane segment of road between Poynton's Road and 2169 Woolsthorpe Haywood Road. And what you're saying there is that that section is required to be widened to 7 metres to provide 2 sealed traffic lanes in each direction. Is that your evidence?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and is that work that's to be undertaken by the applicant by the wind farm operator or the person who's undertaking the construction work?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and at what stage is that required to be constructed? Is that something that ought to be constructed before commencement of construction?
Before commencement of construction, it's not necessarily prior to the establishment of the on-site quarry if that goes ahead. So I'm comfortable if some preliminary plant and equipment are moved to the project site prior, but certainly prior to the commencement of significant construction works in terms of delivery of internal access roads and wind turbine footings, etc.
Okay. And in terms of your subsequent paragraphs 52 and 53, where you say that additional project traffic doesn't warrant widening and upgrading of the section of Woolsthorpe Haywood Road, there are you referring to the section of the road that's to the west of the site where there's a different level of traffic anticipated?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. At paragraph 56, you've talked about the frequency of the use of the stock crossing and the need to provide a stock underpass to provide safe egress or movement for cattle where there's project traffic. To what extent do you think it's necessary or appropriate that there be geotechnical investigations undertaken before that work commences to ensure that the underpass can be water free and to be used in the way that you've anticipated?
I have to say that's beyond my area of expertise. I'm not a geotechnical expert by any means, so I can comment on the need to provide the crossing itself, but not how the specifics about how the crossing would be provided and constructed.
Fair enough. Can I take you then to table 9.3 in your report? Actually, we'll withdraw that one. Okay, those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We do need to take a little bit of a break. Just before we do, sorry, I may mispronounce your name. Is it Mr. Whaley or Mr. Wally?
It's Mr. Wally, but I've heard Mr. Whaley many times, so that doesn't worry
Okay,
me.
thank you. Oh, thank goodness I pronounced it properly.
It might be me that's mispronounced it. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Just good to know the pronunciation for going forward. We'll take a break now. We'll come back at 11. It's time's now 11:32. So just after 11:30. Thank you. Thanks everyone. Welcome back. We just heard questions of Mr. Wally from Ms. Marshall on behalf of Moyne Shire Council. Now the IAP will continue questions through Member O'Neill.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Wally. May be beyond your scope, but following on from a question Ms. Marshall put to you about whether you considered the road construction over the proposed stock track. A similar question, and part of this came out of the hydrological work, but talks to the need to raise the pavement levels for some roads, including the old Dunmore Road. So at this stage in the project, have you turned your mind to specifics about road construction and what type of work would be involved for those type of upgrades?
Only in the context of width, and largely to be consistent with the design requirements when Shire Council's design guidelines. But so yeah, carriageway width only, but not the implications of that.
And has there been consideration about the implications for areas of the site that's subject to inundation and what impact that may have on road construction or indeed usability of the roads throughout the site?
I'm unaware of that, if that's specifically been undertaken.
In terms of, I know you've undertaken an assessment of the site accommodating an on-site quarry or using the resources from quarries external to the site. I understood your evidence in chief that the preferred quarry would be the Tyrone, which is the most proximate. Has there been an assessment as to whether the Tyrone quarry would be able to provide all of the material required for construction of this wind farm?
Again, I'm unaware of any specific discussions that have been had between Willatook Wind Farm and any quarry operators. My experience is that generally these outcomes are subject to the capacity of the quarry and other contracts at the time the material is actually needed to be sourced. So again, it's another element as to where the traffic management plan and that further assessment at the time of the traffic management plan is a key element of managing the project traffic outcomes. Thank
you. There's also reference in the TIA that talks about the internal access roads and typical pavement widths, and they're quite varied across the site. And I think you also referenced that in your evidence in chief. So they range between 6 and 12 metres. Is there a plan showing the locations of the roads and the different widths throughout the site? Is this in reference to roads to be delivered as within the site? In the site, and so internal access tracks and not public roads. If yes. I'm not aware of a specific plan that shows that. No. So would you be able to bring up a plan to show us where they would differ?
I haven't been provided with a plan. I've been provided with plans that show the internal access road network.
Mhm.
And figure 3.3 my evidence statement is showing that layout.
Mhm.
The width of specific road the width of particular roads in that network, I don't believe I have a plan that shows that.
Okay, and so what's the reasoning behind the need for different widths? Is it different? Well, I'll ask you the question. What's the need for that?
It will I've relied on advice provided to me by Willatook Wind Farm in terms of to determine the quantity of materials in terms of the assessment of those. The specific need for the wider roads will be to do with issues around moving turbine components on some locations, which obviously we're dealing with larger oversized pieces versus and substation components, etc., versus other access tracks, which will be largely just used for internal movement around the wind farm project site.
Okay. So whether that's something, Mr. Power, you can address us more on in relation to the location of those roads. I guess it's questions beyond Mr. Wally per se in terms of traffic. It's more to do with ecological considerations. So asking within the context of that. Okay, thanks, Mr. Wally. They were all the panel's questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just quickly, just one follow-up, Mr. Wally. You asked a question about whether the terrain quarry would have sufficient material. How would it affect your assessment if that quarry wasn't able to sufficiently provide material for the project?
There's two elements to that. One is subject to the on-site quarry establishment, and with the on-site quarry being established, that would deliver 80% of the aggregate required for footings and road construction. So in the context of the on-site quarry, it'd be very minimal. In the context of the on-site quarry not being provided, the other quarry sites, two of the other three quarry sites are to the east of the project area and would still rely on the section of Woolsthorpe Haywood Road that construction haulage vehicles from the terrain quarry would also use. So again, it wouldn't have a significant difference in terms of the impact and mitigation elements discussed in the TIA.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Let's see if Mr. Power has any re-examination.
No re-examination from me, sir.
All right. I appreciate your time this morning, Mr. Wally. You may be excused.
Thank you.